It all began with something so small, so fragile, that no one could have imagined it would carry the weight of an entire love story. A message. Just a simple message, one that was never sent, or perhaps was forgotten in the chaos of pride, distance, and silence. They both lived lives that seemed larger than life, dazzling on the outside, yet deeply fragile when the cameras were gone. Yaman, the man who conquered Italy, adored in Turkey, chased by paparazzi at every corner. And Demet Özdemir, the actress who had made millions believe in love again, the woman whose eyes carried both fire and storm. Together, they had written a story that people all around the world couldn't stop talking about. But behind all the glamour, behind every headline and rumor, there was a truth, hidden, unspoken, sealed away in a single forgotten message that could have changed everything. The night it all began was ordinary, and yet unforgettable. Ken had been away, traveling for work, drowning himself in endless schedules, events, and obligations. His phone buzzed on the table of his hotel room in Rome. He glanced at it, expecting another meeting reminder, another demand for his presence. But it wasn't that. It was Demet's name. Her name alone was enough to make his heart stop, to pull him back to nights when they had laughed until dawn, when the world outside didn't exist. He picked up the phone, read the first words on the screen, and froze. She had written something that cut straight through all the pride, all the walls they had built since their separation. But then, something happened. The call from his manager came, urgent, pulling him out the door. He left the room, and with it, left the message unopened. Hours passed. The city lights blurred, cameras flashed, voices called his name, and the world demanded his attention. By the time he returned, the phone was silent again. He picked it up, unlocked it, and saw her name. For a moment, he felt that familiar rush of fear and longing. But he told himself, not tonight. He placed the phone face down. The message stayed there. Forgotten. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have known, was that on the other side of that message, Demet was waiting. She had written it with trembling fingers, her heart racing, knowing it might be the last chance to reach him, to tell him the truth she had buried for so long. She had written, deleted, rewritten 100 times before finally pressing send. She stayed up, staring at her phone, waiting for those 3 little dots that never appeared. Hours turned into silence, silence turned into heartbreak. And in her mind, that silence was his answer. Years later, both would carry the weight of that moment. She would convince herself that he didn't care enough to reply, and he would convince himself that she had never written at all. One forgotten message. One decision not to open it. And everything changed. But fate has a cruel way of circling back. Because what happens when the truth about that message resurfaces? What happens when the world discovers that there was a night, a message, a chance, that could have rewritten their entire destiny? It's strange how a single choice can echo for years. That night in Rome, when Kim placed his phone face down, he believed it was just another night, just another message he could answer later. He had no idea that this silence would become the loudest memory of his life. For Demet, that night was the breaking point. She had poured her heart into words she never dared to say in person. She had written, "I can't stop thinking about you. No matter how far we are, no matter what everyone else says, a part of me still belongs to you." Those words, raw and fragile, carried every piece of her truth. And yet, as the hours stretched into the morning, all she had was silence. To her, his silence meant rejection. To him, it was simply postponement. But fate doesn't forgive postponement. Fate demands courage in the moment, not later. The days that followed were heavy. Demet carried herself with the grace of a woman who knew the world was watching. Interviews, red carpets, smiling photographs, all of it became her shield. No one saw the quiet tears in the backseat of a car, the long nights when she scrolled back to that sent message, rereading her own words and wondering if she had been a fool. For Ken, life moved forward in the opposite direction. Italy embraced him like its own son. He became the face of brands, the star of television, the man everyone wanted. Yet in the silence of hotel rooms, when the applause faded, he sometimes picked up his phone and stared at her name in his contacts, never daring to write, never daring to ask why they had stopped speaking. Pride is a dangerous thing. It convinces you that silence is strength when in truth it is the slowest form of loss. Months became years. Rumors came and went. Demet's name was linked with others, her career soaring, her beauty admired everywhere. Ken was photographed with women who smiled at his side, their hands linked for a moment, only to disappear from his life soon after. And yet, no matter how many people stood beside them, the world refused to forget. Fans across continents kept whispering the same names, Ken and Demet. Because deep down, everyone knew the story wasn't finished. It couldn't be. There was too much left unsaid. And then, one day, destiny decided to reopen the wound. A journalist, digging through old archives, uncovered something unexpected, a fragment of that forgotten message. Somehow, through backups and data trails, the words resurfaced. It was an earthquake in silence. For years, fans had speculated about what had really happened between them. Now, there was proof that something had been left behind, something unsent, unread, misunderstood. Headlines screamed. The forgotten message that could have changed everything. Overnight, the past wasn't past anymore. It was alive, raw, and burning in the present. For Demet, seeing those words again was like reliving the night all over. The trembling hands, the fear, the hope, everything came rushing back. And the pain too, because now the world knew, but he still hadn't answered. For Ken, it was worse. The truth cut through his carefully built walls. He realized, too late, that the silence he thought was strength had been the greatest mistake of his life. He admitted to himself what he had never admitted before: he had loved her. Deeply, painfully, completely. And he had let her slip away because he hadn't opened a message. The media frenzy was unstoppable. Every show, every magazine, every fan account dissected the message word by word. They debated what might have happened if he had answered, if he had simply written back, "I feel the same." Would they have stayed together? Would they have fought for each other against the world? Would they have been married now, maybe even parents? It was speculation, but it was speculation born from a real wound. Because what everyone felt was this: the tragedy wasn't that they didn't love each other. The tragedy was that they did, but they never said it out loud. Ken found himself in interviews where he was cornered by questions. He dodged, he smiled politely, but the truth was written in his eyes. And one night, during a charity gala in Milan, he finally broke. A journalist asked, "Do you regret anything about your past with Demet?" He paused, the room silent, and then he whispered, "Yes. I regret the message I never answered." It was a confession that shook the room. The cameras captured it, the world spread it like wildfire. And for the first time, the walls between them began to crack. Demet, hearing those words, felt something she hadn't in years: hope. Not the childish kind of hope that believes everything will magically be fixed, but a mature, fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, the story wasn't completely over. She had told herself countless times that she had moved on, that the silence had killed everything. But now, hearing him confess, she realized the silence hadn't killed the love, it had only buried it alive. And buried things can be uncovered. But what happens when two people who have built entire worlds apart are suddenly faced with the chance to rewrite the past? Can love survive years of pride, distance, misunderstandings? Or does the weight of what could have been crush the possibility of what could still be? The forgotten message had returned, and with it, every wound, every dream, every unanswered question. And as they finally stood face to face once more, with the world watching, one truth was undeniable: sometimes it's not the words we say that define our destiny, but the words we never did. The night they finally stood face to face was nothing like the glittering red carpets or staged photo shoots of the past. There were no flashing lights, no eager fans pushing against barricades. It was quiet. Too quiet. A small cafe in Istanbul, closed off for privacy, dim lights casting soft shadows on the walls. He arrived first, restless, his hands trembling despite the calm expression he tried to wear. Then the door opened, and she stepped in. For a moment, the air between them froze. Years of silence, pain, longing, all of it pressed down on them like a storm waiting to break. Neither spoke at first. They just stared, as if searching for the versions of each other they had lost. She looked the same, yet different. Stronger, yet more fragile. He saw in her eyes the echoes of every laugh they once shared, every fight, every stolen glance on set. She saw in him the boyish smile that had once made her believe anything was possible, now weighed down with regret. Finally, he whispered, "I never saw it." His voice cracked, raw with truth. "That night. I never read your message. I thought I would later. But later never came." Her breath caught. All the years of anger, of convincing herself that his silence had been rejection, crumbled in an instant. Tears filled her eyes, not just of pain but of relief, because finally she had the answer she had been waiting for. "I thought you ignored me," she whispered. "I thought it meant you didn't love me." He shook his head, his eyes shining with tears he could no longer hold back. "I loved you. More than I could ever admit. And my biggest mistake was letting pride and fear keep me from telling you." Silence fell again, but this time it wasn't heavy, it was fragile, trembling with possibility. She looked at him, her heart torn between past wounds and present hope. Could they go back? Could they rebuild? Or was it too late, with too many years lost? But then, he reached into his pocket and placed his phone on the table. He opened it, pulled up her name, and typed a single line, "I still love you." He didn't send it. He pushed the phone toward her, his eyes begging. "This time, you decide if it gets sent." Her hand hovered over the screen, her heart racing. In that moment, she realized the truth. It wasn't about the message anymore. It wasn't about the one forgotten text years ago. It was about now. About whether they had the courage to choose each other, here, in this fragile present. With trembling fingers, she pressed send. The sound of the notification was small, almost insignificant. But in that quiet cafe, it echoed like thunder. It was not just a message, it was a second chance, a rewriting of fate. And outside, the world continued spinning, unaware that inside those four walls, two people had just undone years of silence with a single forgotten message, finally remembered, finally answered. Because sometimes, the love stories that haunt us the most are not the ones that ended, but the ones that almost never had the chance to begin.